Yo, what I'm holding in my hands, this book is called Reshimas HaMenorah. Reshima means notes, and Menorah means the menorah. So the story behind this book is as follows. After the Rebbe passed away in 1994, on the 3rd of Tammuz, so the executors responsible for the Rebbe's belongings and so on, discovered a whole series of notebooks of Torah that the Rebbe had written. For the most part, they were notes for talks that he was giving, but actually not the most part. They were just his notes, Torah novellae, Torah insights, that he wrote before he was a Rebbe. Not in New York. Most of it was written in Paris and Riga. And these were all copious notes, Torah, fascinatingly, which he never spoke, never addressed when he was a Rebbe in his thousands of hours that he spoke, indicating that he was leaving us for a time when he would not be speaking. It was all new material. And so they set about publishing it. A team of scholars had to work on it because the notes were written very tersely, very briefly, and you needed big scholars to understand, formidable scholars on what the Rebbe is saying, and they published it. And these works published are set now like this. This is one book. The entire set would be about this big, and frankly, to give you an idea, to render it into English and make it understandable to a reader, an intelligent reader with a background in Torah, it would be 3 times the size. Translations are, as you can see from the Talmud, 3 times at least the size of the original Hebrew. So it's a lot of material which people are studying throughout the world. Now, this history of this is that the previous Rebbe had instructed the Rebbe. It seems that someone had requested that of him. So the previous Rebbe instructs his young son-in-law to write a treatise on the menorah, explaining the menorah of its legal facets, its spiritual and Kabbalistic dimensions as well. The result is this book. In translation again would be literally 3 times the size. Now, just to give you an idea of, it's a photocopy of the original manuscript, 1 page of the original manuscript. This is actual size. That's how it's written, very small, and it's extremely seminal and terse, and needed a team of scholars that labored over it and deciphered it. And what they did for the benefit, this is of the Hebrew reader, to give you an idea. This is what an average page looks like. So the top of the page is the original work, notes of the Rebbe. Below, in the bold, is the original, and the not bold are the elucidators or the editors that are explaining what was just said and providing connecting language so that it flows for the reader. In other words, the average scholar would have difficulty on his own reading, figuring this out. You get a general idea, certainly, but they've made it they've done the job for us, they've done the research, they've linked it all together, and hence that's what you're looking at. Some pages will be just a few lines at the top, and lots of notes and explanatory notes, etc. in below. When they would give a source, they would then, for the reader's benefit, quote the source so you can see the full source and making it readable. So to give you an idea, we've been studying this now in MTC in the morning class before Shachris, each morning now. I think it's class number 23, and we've covered this much, these pages in 23 classes. So it's a labor, it's a true labor, both a labor of love and intellectual labor. Now I'm going to share with you just some of the basic ideas that are explained in this treatise on the menorah. Actually, what I'm going to share this morning doesn't get us to the menorah yet, because this is all an introduction. Because first the Rebbe addresses There's two sections, mind you. Section 1 I didn't even do with that's way too complex. It's the Talmudic analysis of the various views of how the menorah was lit and where it was placed, and that would take us a year or longer to get through it. So I just went straight to the spiritual dimension of the temple and the menorah, and that is a dense study as well. At any rate, so what we get before it gets to the menorah is a discussion of the temple itself. So he identifies as follows. As we all know, the temple that was built in Jerusalem, which is, this particular book. So this book is a graphic description of the Beit HaMikdash on the Temple Mount. This one, the Mishkan, the sanctuary in the desert. They're essentially, as we learned last week, one entity, God's home, as it evolves from the temporary structure in the desert to the permanent structure eventually in Jerusalem. So although it evolves drastically in terms of permanence and size, the basic components remain the same. Moreover, the vessels remain the same. The sacred vessels, the menorah, the ark, the two altars, the golden table, all remain the same. It's just that the building evolves. But even the building itself, as mentioned, the basic components and the basic layout remains uniform, from the one that Moses made in the desert to the one King Solomon made to the one that will be revealed or built when Mashiach comes. There are subtle evolutionary changes, but overall the basic outline. And that is, if you look at, starting with the Mishkan in the desert, so identify three areas. The three areas are the courtyard. We're talking about, as the Torah refers to it, the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. That's how the sanctuary is called in general. So there's the courtyard. It's an open area surrounded by a lattice kind of fence. We can look at it, but we're all familiar. Then there is the sanctuary proper that divides into two. Now the sanctuary in the desert was, as you know, interlocking poles, wood, with tapestries for a roof, various kinds of tapestries. So that divides into two areas, the holy and the holy of holies. The holy contained, so let's go out. In the courtyard, what was in the courtyard? Two things were situated there. One, the outer altar, the copper altar, upon which the sacrifices were offered. So we're going to walk from east to west now. We're progressing now from the front towards the holy and the holy of holies. So first we encounter the courtyard. First thing we see is this copper large altar with a ramp leading up to it on its left or its south side. Then we go progress further. There's the kiyar, the brass laver, which the Kohanim washed their hands and feet each morning. You know that it was made from the melted down mirrors of the women. You know that story, we've talked about it at length. And that is the courtyard. That's what's situated in the courtyard. Now we enter into the Heichal, the sanctuary, or the Ohel Moed itself, tent of meeting, tent because of its temporary roof. So the first section as mentioned is called the holy, and inside there were the three vessels. The first thing you encounter is in a triangle form. The first thing you encounter is the inner golden altar upon which the incense was offered twice daily. To the left, the menorah. To the right, the golden table. A curtain. Behind that, the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies was the ark that contained the tablets, the Ten Commandments that God gave the Jewish people, also a Torah. There are two views. At any rate, the ark. So to summarize the three sections, the courtyard, we'll call it the courtyard, the holy of holies. But actually, to me, it was courtyard, holy of holies. To translate that, we have to use these terms, get them straight. In the temple built in Jerusalem, so the courtyard is called the Azorah. That's what's now called there. Azorah means Ezra, help. That's where we come to invoke God's assistance, the offerings, etc. The heichal is the building proper, which is the same as the tent of meeting. Now it's a building. And then the westernmost part of the heichal, the Holy of Holies. So courtyard, holy of holies, if you like. Courtyard, Azora, heichal, kodesh hakadoshim. That's the basic outline in the Holy Temple, as was in the original Mishkan, prescribed and described in detail in the desert. We're clear so far? Okay. So what this discourse explains is how the temple, Jerusalem in general, particularly the temple, is, in a sense, a microcosm of all of creation and the pinnacle of all of creation. Jerusalem, Israel, is the pinnacle of all lands. Jerusalem within Israel, it's the Temple Mount. Within the Temple Mount, it is the temple itself, the pinnacle of creation. In fact, our sages say as follows: as you know, the reason that they call it the Dome of the Rock, and so this building is built on the very site of the Holy Temple, and they call it the Dome of the Rock because there's a rock that juts out from the floor of the Temple Mount there. It's called the Even HaShasiyah. That was right, the top of it was right at the center of the Holy of Holies, and that's where the Holy Ark was placed. Even HaShasiyah means foundation stone. Our sages say that that's the foundation stone of the world. It's like the core essence of the world, around which the entire world is built. So, it's the pinnacle of creation, as is the human being the pinnacle of creation. The human being is a microcosm, as explored later in this discourse, a microcosm of the universe, and he is the pinnacle, the purpose of it all. The human being should serve God and elevate and tie and unite all of creation. And that's what the temple does. So the temple also parallels the human being, as we'll see, and has the same components as the human being in general, and the Jew, of course, within humanity, having the responsibility for all of humanity. Having said that, so the discourse begins with a teaching, an elemental teaching of the Rambam. Maimonides, the great Maimonides, writes in his famous work, the Mishnah Torah, the Code of Jewish Law, as follows in Hilchos Yesod HaTorah, in those opening chapters that deals with the foundations of Judaism. He says, all of existence was going to close this slide. I don't think we need it. There we go. A little more subtle. He says that all of existence is divided into three dimensions. There are three stratas, three levels. The lowest level of creation or existence is corporeal, physical, temporary. It's temporary, it's always in a state of flux and change, and for that matter, erosion. And there's a cycle of energy and matter, the endless cycle, but it's always changing, and it's finite, and it's limited. Let's use a catchword to define that so it'll make us easier to remember, and we contrast it to the other levels. We'll call it again, as I just mentioned, temporal. That's level one. Yeah, that's the physical reality which the five senses relate to. Then there's a higher level of existence. We'll call it transparent. Stick with the T's to keep it easy, so right, we can link them all up. So this is a higher level, which is somewhat difficult to define. The Rambam talks in terms of spheres that surround the world in successive layers. Exactly what that means, I don't know. I'm not sure if anybody does. Maybe some do. But it's defined this way. There is an element of physicality to this level, but it's a transparent physicality. Unlike the first lowest level, which is hardcore, physical, and temporary, and tangible, not the T, tangible. And this level is somewhat translucent. It's physical, but at the same time doesn't contain. There's both. There's what physical. There's both matter and spirit. Let's go back to the first level. The first level is matter, and the spirit or energy that's within matter is completely concealed. What dominates level 1 is physical matter, although there is spirit there as well. This, by the way, and I was borne out by contemporary science that the atom is a highly dynamic component of existence, and the subatomic level, it's all kinds of tremendous energies, even faster than the speed of light, as recent quantum physics has discovered. So there's tremendous energy in inanimate objects, but that's lost. To the senses, what you just see is a piece of whatever it is, of stone or wood, or even an animal, and it ages and decays and is subject to change. So there is spirit there, but completely concealed and subordinate to the overt, physical, limited dimension of life, of what it is. Not so the second level. The second level is the spirituality of it, the energy is transparent and can be seen in the physicality. Hence I use the word transparency, it's a higher form of life. Now again, point to it, we can, because it's not that physical, but it's still part of the physical domain. There may be a good scientific term for this. I don't know it. Maybe scientists would, Dr. Brown, perhaps others, physicists, Hasidic physicists, or Torah physicists, of which there are many. And then there is a third level.
Is that like the vegetative?
Huh?
Is that like the vegetative level?
No, the vegetative level is part of all physicality, including animal life, everything. It's all physicality.
We had inanimate. Are we doing the same type
No,
of thing?
no. Level 1 is inanimate and vegetative life and animal life, all three.
All three.
And for that matter, the physical human being. If you look at the physical human being, he's physical. Well, there you do see an energy, much more so. So, but putting him out of the picture, it's the three levels of tangible existence, including vegetative and animal. The second level is not a level that you can physically touch with your hands. It can be observed, experienced, but it's quasi purely spiritual.
So it's like
again,
sound,
it's transparent.
Sound,
Well, you know what? Yeah, you're making a point. It's going to get clearer when I parallel. Good point. And we parallel it to the human being. It'll get clearer. So let's just posit these things and it'll become clearer as we continue our discussion. But first, another gulp of my coffee.
It's called universal consciousness as well. The scientists have a name for it. The second.
Maybe. That sounds good.
Universal consciousness.
And energy, the unifying force that unites everything, perhaps. It's quasi-physical. Then there's the third level, which you call simply angelic, and that's purely spiritual, divested of any physical limitations, completely, absolutely, purely spiritual. For those of us who are familiar with Kabbalah, what this means is really the world of Asiya, lowest level, the world of Yitzira, and the world of Bria. That's what we're talking about. So they are the physical, they are the coordinates that define existence in all of its levels. So let's use our catchwords. 1, temporal. 2, transparent. And 3, you want to guess the third T? Transcendent. Thank you, that's the term I've chosen. And that's the one. So to keep it easy and to remember the 3 T's. All right. The parallel to the human being. We started off our discussion by saying that the human being is the apex of creation, the purpose of it all. So embodied in the human being are these 3 levels as well. And there are many manifestations of that. Here is a basic one. We communicate, friends, in 3 ways. Action, words, sound, and thought. So they match up. They parallel each other. Action, you make an act, it's finite, defined, it's physical. We act, of course, in the physical world. Speech. Now, speech is a sound. Sound is something. In halacha, speech is a quasi-action. It's called maise zutta. It's not quite the same as a physical act like putting on tefillin or making a mark or whatever, the actual physical tefillin, the mezuzah. But it's not purely spiritual either. And as we can appreciate, a sound is a sound that's measured and it's the vibration of the vocal cords. But overall, it doesn't have, you can't touch the sound. So it's quasi-physical, quasi-spiritual, corresponds to the middle level. But it does have an element, again, of corporeality to it, which is why, incidentally, when you pray or when you learn Torah, you're supposed to articulate it with sound. Move the lips, that's a physical action there, but that's not the sound. It's what releases the sound. But actually say it, because by saying it, you're bringing down what you're praying into our world. You're engaging yourself on a physical level to some degree. You're engaging the animal soul. You're engaging your physical component, your body. You're moving your lips. You're producing a sound. True, not the same sound not the same act as something you can take a picture of or touch with your hands, but it's still a sound. So it corresponds to the middle, still a kind of action, a quasi-action, and hence it corresponds to what? The middle level, and that T would be what? Transparency, which implies there's something there, but you can see through it. It's physical, but it's also somewhat ethereal. That's the second level. That's the world of speech. And of course, the highest world, which is relatively speaking purely spiritual, of course, it's all physical. We're talking about the human being in this world. Thinking is something you can measure on a graph of some kind. But relatively speaking, in the world of thought that's purely spiritual, there's no sound, there's nothing corporeal. When someone thinks the outsider is not privy to. So that is the spiritual dimension. Pardon? Yeah. For the most part, if not all the part. So the translation of these three levels Maimonides speaks of all of existence as is embodied in the human being, who is the microcosm. It's called an olam katan. Human being is called a small universe. Whatever exists in the universe exists with the human being. All of the details, everything. Here we're speaking in general terms. The three dimensions of all of existence. Here's where exists in the human being: action, speech, and thought, which parallel the temple. So let's just identify this. Generally speaking, the courtyard corresponds to what? Action. The heichal, that's the term we're using, where in the temple building proper, the tent of meeting, where there was the incense and so on, and the menorah, and the three things, the menorah and the table, that corresponds to speech, to a higher level. And then we're going to explore this now, the Holy of Holies, the most sublime level, corresponds to thought. Let's just now a little bit elaborate upon that. Let's see what happens in the courtyard. What happens in the courtyard is, physical action.
Sacrifices.
The sacrifices are offered there. So not only is there physical action in the courtyard, but if you look what happens in the courtyard, everything there is all mirroring and reflecting level one, change and decay. The animal is slaughtered and offered on the altar, death, for a sublime purpose and elevation, but that reflects the nature of the physical world, constant change, and things die, and then there's rebirth, but that's gone. Now it's rebirth on another level. And the Rebbe goes into a lot of detail here, halachic detail of things that went on in the courtyard that all show the idea of change, and again, he's the strong word decay, but that's what defines the physical limits of our world. Things erode and break down. They're not eternal. Nothing is in the physical world.
Subject to time.
Subject to time. So we see that, for example, this was kind of a miracle, but used to happen during the times of the first temple and the Mishkan that Moses brought, and that is, for example, just one example, the crop of bird offerings. They were not offered on the altar. A poor person would bring a bird offering if he could not afford to bring an animal. And so it was offered on the altar, but they would remove the intestine. Reason is because birds, everybody knows the reason Rashi brings this in Chumash.
They eat, they're always eating dirt.
Well, animals can do that too, but it's because birds are not contained and they can eat, even it's your own pigeon, but it can be eating food belonging to somebody else. Right? You can't control that. Stolen food, not proper to offer that on the altar. This is just an aside. Bottom line, I'm going to bring out is that they would remove it. It was placed on the ground of the courtyard and absorbed there. So this is a very graphic demonstration of things decaying, breaking down, and disappearing. And many other illustrations of how the courtyard represents the world of finite action, subject to time, the vicissitudes of time, and ultimate disappearance. Action, courtyard. We'll see later.
Disappearance. Not real, disappearance in
its physical form does
its
disappear.
Original form, but nothing.
The energy, the spirit continues, which is not visible to the naked eye. The physical form has to be gone.
Yeah.
That's not going to be ever again like that. That's finished.
Right.
That's dead, buried, gone, decays. That's what defines the physical reality. So we'll see later also that the material used in the courtyard, of all the materials, was copper, the lowest level. The laver was copper, the altar was made of copper, and we'll see as we progress further, silver and then gold. But back to the courtyard. Also in the courtyard is the laver. And what's the laver? The laver is to purify, to wash ourselves up from impurity and get rid of it, right? So that's again the idea of having an engagement in something that is not necessarily good and needs to be removed and done away with. Again, that's change, time, evolution. And tremendous other illustrations of how the courtyard is defined by changingness. Here's a fascinating one. Even the altar was not always of uniform size. The vessels, we'll see in contrast, that were in the Heichal, their dimensions remained the same. Not only remained the same, the ones that Moses fashioned, they were the ones that were used for the most part. And even when they had to duplicate them, it was exactly the same as the original. But because that's a higher level, transparent world is not subject to change, like the first world. The lowest world is changing. So even the altar had different dimensions. In the sanctuary it was 3 cubits, and there was 10 cubits, and they added to it, illustrating change. Even in the altar.
Well, that's a force of physicality going from the desert to the temple. You had a different size thing.
You didn't have to. But even
dimension-wise, no?
The courtyard, but now we're saying even the altar changed. Even the altar.
But fitting-wise, it wouldn't fit, right? I mean, if you had a huge altar in the desert, it wouldn't fit.
No, it became bigger. On the contrary, the altar in the Beit HaMikdash was bigger than the altar in the.
Correct.
So it certainly would fit. So it would fit easily in the courtyard
The courtyard of which one?
of the Beit HaMikdash.
Of course.
There's room for it.
The other one in the not Mishkan, it wouldn't fit dimension. In other words,
But it went
you have to change size.
It doesn't have to change size. You could use the same one in the
Same one,
Mishkan.
okay.
You could use it there. It's bigger. You got more space. But I'm saying even more. Even when they built it, even they built it in the size of the altar in the second temple was bigger than the first temple. There's change even. I'm saying not only in the building, but not only do we see change in the courtyard, things that were done there, but even the vessels. Even the vessels were subject to change. The altar itself they added to its height. Moreover, even in the structure of the courtyard, we see this idea of change. This is a fascinating thing. King Solomon, his wisdom remains mystifying, and although we could do it today, but how he did it then, we don't know. For example, his throne that he built. His throne was this mechanical throne that when he would step onto it, it would lead him from one step to the other. Described at length in the by sages in the Medrash, the various animals, golden animals that were carved out on the side of the throne, they were all animated. In the end, when he sat on the throne, his his crown was suspended above his head, if I'm not mistaken, held in the beak of an eagle. This is all mechanical. Just looked like it sat on him, but it was heavy, just enough to keep it off. It's tremendous engineering ingenuity. So that was one thing, but that's nothing to do with the temple. That was in his palace, his throne. In the temple, he constructed, outside the courtyard, there was a golden vine made of golden fruit. But it would mirror the seasons. So during the growing season, it would produce fruits, and I guess it would recede during the harvest. Incredible mechanical ingenuity. I'm not saying this is miraculous, but the point we're bringing out is change. It's not constant. And that's what defines this lowest world. It's a world of constant change. All right. So that is the what?
Courtyard.
The courtyard. Now we proceed to the next level. What's the big T? Transparency. So transparency implies a quasi, quite in-between world, in between physical and purely transcendent spiritual. So what do we see there? So first of all, we encounter the inner altar. So what was the inner altar? They offer the incense there. Now incense, aroma, on the one hand it's physical, but aroma is spiritual. When a person faints, we revive him with aroma, because what's fainting? The soul has kind of, the energy is disconnected from the physical body, and this summons the soul back, which is why after Shabbos we inhale the spices, because of this vacuum that is left as a result of the Sabbath, godly Sabbath soul leaving. So we summon our soul to fill that vacuum.
Also speech.
Huh?
We also awaken him with speech, which fits.
And it corresponds to speech because we what?
You say his name, it revives him.
You say his name, it revives him.
So it's also that level.
It's all that, yeah, interesting point not made here, but yeah, interesting parallel. Our sages say that on the verse in Tehillim, which we say every day in davening, Kol HaNeshama, all souls should praise him. What's the soul praising him for? What is the soul getting? In this world, that the soul praises Hashem. So the Talmud answers aroma. That's the one thing that the neshama benefits from. Which is why in Yom Kippur, even though we are to divest ourselves, we're not allowed to have any physical pleasure, we're allowed to have, and one should even, inhale smelling salts, whatever aroma, and even make a bracha over it, because the body is not what benefits, that's the soul. But it's not purely physical, it is, and I'm sorry, not purely spiritual, it's quasi. Of course, the lights in the menorah, obviously, light, of all physical things, it's almost pure energy, so it's physical, but it's also transparent, in the sense that it's somewhat spiritual. Energy, light. You must be thinking, huh?
But it's temporary.
Actually,
the wax is.
actually, the Western light, when we deserved it, burned continuously. So there, it was lit, but some wasn't lit. So there's this fusion of temporary and eternity. So yes, one remained lit, but the other ones were rekindled. The most enigmatic is the table that had the bread. Hey, bread, that's physical. Bread's physical. That belongs, the 12 breads, sure, that belongs in the courtyard. That's the world of physicality. But the point here is that the bread was both physical but also at the same time spiritual. When we see the spirituality, the bread remained fresh throughout the entire week. It was replaced each week, so that's the physical component, but remained like it was just baked. That's the spiritual component. Moreover, it wasn't eaten by anybody. It was eaten only by the Kohanim, and only in a state of purity. So it is physical, but quasi-physical. It's not your ordinary bread. It's the physical that's transparent. Unless you look at the bread and you can see, hey, there's a spiritual component to this that is integral to it. Like looking at the menorah. We're rekindling 6 of the lights, but the 7th burns continuously. So the heichal, containing these 3 sacred vessels, and it's made of gold, unlike copper. It's made of gold. which is symbolically the highest, most rarefied of materials, the most pure of materials. Mind you, this, I should just point out parenthetically, before they entered into you'd enter into the Heichal with the three vessels where there was an antechamber called an ulam. There were two tables there, and they were used to take, you need two tables, one every Shabbos to put the fresh 12 breads on, and the other one to take the old breads off, still fresh, and distribute amongst the Kohanim. The old ones were placed on a golden table, but the fresh ones were placed either on silver or marble. And the consensus is most say marble, because it's hot and fresh. You don't want to put it on metal, it's put on marble. But spiritually, because that's the link, we're going from copper, from the corporeal world, this is the subdivision, to the rare, from the temporal to the transcendent. There is within that this transitory stage represented by copper, gold, but in between, silver or marble. A quasi in between. This is a nuance. It's all part of the Heichal. Doesn't get its own designation, but we can see the transition from lower forms of experience and existence to higher. Then we go into the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies is purely spiritual. Purely spiritual, as we see, so spiritual in fact that there were times in the Second Temple there wasn't even the Ark there. Not even the Ark. Even though the Ark, as we discussed yesterday at length, Shabbos, actually we didn't go into the Ark proper in this sense, but it housed the Ten Commandments, and the Ark was purely spiritual, took up no space. As we have demonstrated, you can see immediately that this is otherworldly, and that's the highest level. And as I just mentioned, there were times even when there was no Ark in there, so it's purely spiritual, divest and devoid of anything physical. No Ark to the naked eye. The Ark is there, but completely not seen, because it represents the highest level, the world of, in the words of the Rambam, angels. So this is a general outline of the three levels corresponding to thought, speech, and action, or rather, action, words, speech, and thought. We see, by the way, how in the Holy of Holies, it's all about thought. If he had an impure thought, the high priest on Yom Kippur, even for a moment, he didn't survive it. It's the highest level of pure Neshama. In terms of time, it corresponds to, we're running out of time here ourselves, weekday, Shabbos, and Yom Kippur. Weekday, we're involved in the physical world, purely making a living, and I want to tell you, it's you made $1 yesterday, you're going to make $1 today, because it's spent, it's gone. So, and quite literally, we're out there in the world, engaging the world in a physical way. Shabbos, it's physical, but it's quasi-spiritual, it's transcendent. We eat food on Shabbos like we do during the week, but it's permeated with the divine. There's a spiritual quality. Beautiful stories, running out of time now, that illustrate how the physical components of Shabbos are elevated with the transparency and the quasi-spiritual. Everything. Even the food, the quality of it, and it's running out of time, beautiful stories. Maybe your own experience, it tells you that. You eat the same food you have on Shabbos during the week, it's not the same, because the component of Shabbos is what lends it a transcendence. And then there's Yom Kippur, where we transcend utterly all physicality altogether. So Yom Kippur corresponds to, in time, that different level, which also corresponds to, matching up, the Jewish people divide in these three categories in general. There is Israelites, Kohanim, which include Leviim, because Kohanim are Leviim, and then the Kohen Gadol. So the three categories of the Jewish people all match up to thought, speech, and action in great detail, which we're not going into. The three elements of time and the three components of the Beit HaMikdash. Now I just want to give you this now quickly. Just distribute these, please take one and pass them around, folks. And let's look at these three components. I'm going to hold it up for, take one. For our viewers. Can you see that? How's that? For our viewers, so you can see there, right? Starting from the right of the page, we're going from the bottom up. Courtyard, sanctuary, Holy of Holies, corresponding to, what does it say there? In English, the next column. can't read it.
Lowly world?
Oh, lowly world, world of spheres, and you got the wrong page.
That's it. That's the picture of this.
Yeah, you get like a
So share, just please share for heaven's sakes.
That's confused.
Need one? Yeah. Oh, sure.
All right, let's go quickly. The reader can see this. We could have added the words T, so temporal, transparent, transcendent, corresponds to action, speech, thought, corresponds to Israelite, priest or Kohen, high priest, in terms of time, weekday, Shabbos, and Yom Kippur. That's kind of a summary of what we said. The beauty lies in the details which we went into to some degree, and all of this is introduction to understanding the menorah. But aside from that, in this discourse are parallels in our daily service of God. In our daily service of God, we go through these 3 stages each day: the courtyard, the Heichal, the sanctuary, and the Holy of Holies. So this model repeats itself endlessly because it's the template of all of reality. Hope we got some insight into this beautiful subject. Thank you for listening, folks.